VSM, value stream mapping, or the OE, or the visual management. I want you to think of these as strategic pointers, not just simple tools you can just take into the floor. And we can talk more about them in the following slides. But I really want you to approach it from this perspective. These are some of the many ways that we can actually drive operational excellence. So in the next slide, we're going to talk about how we're going to go about doing arriving at operational excellence. So this is something that my friend said. If we need to measure something, we need to be able to see it. So once we see it, once we measure it, only then we can improve it. We can improve it. A lot of effort goes to waste because it's a shoot from the hip approach, where you wake up one day and you decide you wanted to work on X and Y, and you never established a baseline, out of which you can measure your improvements, and then you lose energy and you lose momentum, and then you kind of give up on the whole thing. So what we need to do is we need to standardize the methodology upon which we work. So we need to be able to see the work. How we can see the work? There are multiple ways we can see the work. The simplest of which is the value stream map. We can talk about it in the following slides. Once we are able to see, then we need to quantify the losses. And losses comes in different forms and shapes and flavors. You can look at waste. You can look at your quality. You can look at your cost. And then cost, you can tie it with inputs to your production, energy, water, labor, raw material. Safety is also another hidden cost, another hidden waste that people tend to overlook. And all of that eventually will drive your bottom line and eat from your profit margins. So once we identify losses, we need to work our way into prioritizing, because you cannot just jump on everything and fix it at once. And then there's a methodology about how to go about that as well, how to prioritize and how to establish a baseline, and then how you check your improvement and then eventually sustain them. And last but not least is, this project is usually complete. Like a process improvement project has a start and a finish and an objective and a team, and it usually comes to an end and people get awarded. So we should not lose track of what we did. So we need to sustain that and then follow the PDA documentation. So this is me telling everybody, don't do documentation for the sake of documentation. You're already going through the documentation. Make a good use out of it. A lot of companies, they implement these quality management systems just for the sake of getting a certificate. You're already going through the headache. So go ahead and do a full cycle of let's establish a baseline. Let's work our way into enhancing the processes. Of course, you're documenting all of that. And then at the end, when your auditor walks into the door, just show him your trail. And it's as easy as that. Next slide, please. Okay. Sustaining is this is one of the very important things that companies tend to fail to do after a consulting firm walks out of their facility. Why these efforts usually fail? Because they get too excited, they have too many KPIs to maintain, and then they feel burdened and they don't have the energy to maintain all these KPIs. The improvements gradually disappear and becomes part of a new reality, and unfortunately that becomes accepted and it gets thrown under cost of goods sold. Ownership is lacking, and the controls and escalations are disappearing. So how can we make sure that these gains actually stick well past the consulting engagement? Just pick a few meaningful metrics and then you can add to them as you go. Escalation when we are off target, these visual tools are very important for that. Assign ownership and talk about it on a weekly basis. I know most companies, they have these weekly lunch and meet. So talk about these things during lunch and meet, and train people on it, standardize it as much as you can. And if you have people that are new to the company, make sure that they are onboarded on the new process and procedures. Next. And I want you to take this away with you. Think about what matters most to you when you're setting your indicators. I suggest that you pick 2 or 3 and then work with them, out of which other indicators will come. But don't try to grasp the whole thing. Just do a phase approach. Let's look at the quality first time through, or maybe let's enhance our overall equipment efficiency for maybe a work center and go from there. So these are the different metrics. You could start off with your visual management. Just be diligent in choosing which one to proceed. Next. And my final slide, just a quick 9-day playbook on how. Sorry, I'm taking a bit longer than anticipated, but I will run this through this quickly. So in your first couple of weeks, choose one value stream, map it, baseline 3 to 5 metrics. And then look at the constraints that causing whatever metrics you're measuring to dip below what you want it to look like. And it's usually, you'll be surprised, there will be things that you can deliver like overnight. Take credit for it. I mean, if it's turning off the lights, it saves you a bit of money. Just take credit for it. Do it. There would be a 50% chance of low-hanging fruits just in front of your eyes that nobody nobody noticed. And then after that, instill visual management, standardize whatever improvements you've done in the second 2 in week 3 and 4, and then train people to lock these improvements. And of course, don't sleep on it. Go back to cycle 1 and replicate that value stream map to some other department, and then repeat the work, lock it in, train people on it, and get credit where credit is due. Okay. Anissa, next slide. So now I will turn it over to my friend Jamie. Thank you guys for active listening.
Thank you so much, Ahmed and Alok. Great content there. I'm really happy to be on here to tell you all a little bit more about how your organization can leverage the AA1000 SES, particularly if you're interested in the energy transition. So if you go on to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about how stakeholder engagement is something that folks can often treat as a box-ticking exercise. But when done right, stakeholder engagement is something that can really mitigate risks, identify opportunities, and also ensure buy-in from your most critical stakeholders. So 5 points about why stakeholder engagement really matters. For folks who have organizations who run materiality assessments, materiality is something that is really stakeholder dependent. So what is material can really shift by group. In sort of the energy transition case study, we talk a lot about how workers might prioritize something like safety and job security, while local communities might focus more on whatever economic impacts are seen in their local communities, while of course investors are most focused on the climate and governance risk component. That's kind of the next piece that's perfect to segue into, which is that stakeholder engagement can really help you detect risk early. Engagement can help surface emerging issues before they become incidents. So anything from sort of a labor grievance from a local community or from workers to broader sort of supplier disruptions. If you're engaging on a sort of ongoing basis, stakeholder engagement is something that can help you pick up on these sort of little flags perhaps earlier in the process. Next, we have data credibility and auditability. So stakeholder inputs are often used for data collection, obviously, and then they're also used to kind of validate assumptions around the data, any data boundaries that are needed, as well as all of these KPIs that Ahmed just kind of walked us through. And you really want to ensure that stakeholders are there to strengthen the quality of the evidence that you might need for disclosures or assurances. Next, I think, is a more obvious sort of reason for why organizations will engage in stakeholder engagement, which is really to sort of earn that license to operate. So stakeholder engagement can really help your organization build legitimacy and reduce friction with any communities, workforce, or customers, which of course can also bring a financial benefit in potentially reducing time needed for approvals or consent processes, including permitting. Finally, stakeholder engagement can really bring about better decisions and performance. So engagement can inform priorities and really be a value add to businesses who see stakeholder engagement as a co-creation process as opposed to just a one-way street. Next slide, please. I'm really happy to talk a little bit about the AA1000 series of standards. So as you can see here, at Accountability, we release 3 standards that are part of our series of standards. They're all principles based, and that's kind of the basis of our first standard here, the AA1000 accountability principles. Our 4 principles are around inclusivity, materiality, responsiveness, and impact. And the latter 2 standards are really grounded in those 4 principles. So the second standard that's in the middle here is the one that we're talking about today. It's actually also currently being updated, which is very exciting. So hopefully next week, we'll be able to put out the standard for public consultation, and we'd be happy to receive all of your feedback and thoughts on the next version of the standard, which really reflects sort of the modern stakeholder engagement landscape. And finally, we have the AA1000 Assurance Standard, which provides a methodology for any sort of sustainability professionals who are looking to evaluate the nature and extent of which an organization is adhering to the AA1000 AP. Into the next slide, please. I'm going to pass it off to Anissa to talk a little bit about the stakeholder engagement process.
Thank you, Jamie, for a great practical overview of the AA1000 standards, and more importantly, like why the stakeholder engagement is important for organizations. As Alok and Ahmed had pointed out, that if you want to do process improvements and which will ultimately lead to sustainable operations, you cannot really do that without proper stakeholder buy-in. So in this slide, I'll be walking you through what the AA1000 stakeholder engagement process actually is, which is really like, if you look at it, a structured, repeatable cycle, which starts with planning, engaging, analyzing, responding, embedding, and then re-engaging again. So what's really making this powerful is that it's just not like a one-time survey. It's actually an auditable management system that links to stakeholder inputs into decisions, metrics, and performance improvement. So these are essentially the 6 steps of doing the stakeholder engagement process. And let me just walk you through it step by step. The first step is planning. So this is basically research, analysis, and defining the purpose and scope of your engagement. So you can answer, why are we engaging? Are we performing a materiality assessment? Are we trying to achieve strategy targets? Are we doing transition planning, or just trying to report a stronger sustainability disclosure? So once you define the boundaries, which could be like sites, which part of the value chain you're looking at, what's the time horizon, whether it's this year, 3 years, or 10 years from now, you ask the question, what decisions will this engagement actually influence? So if the engagement cannot change a decision, then it's not an engagement at all. It's just like a communication exercise. The second step is mapping and prioritizing stakeholders, right? So the AA1000 expects you to identify both internal and external stakeholder groups, which could be your workforce, your customers, your suppliers, the community that you're engaging with. More importantly, regulators, investors, and lenders, right? But you can't really treat everybody equally in the topic. So you have to prioritize what the criteria is, whether you're trying to influence, what is the dependency, how do you measure the impact severity, the proximity, are there any vulnerabilities, and if expertise is really needed. So this avoids the biggest pitfall, which is engaging loudest voices instead of the most material ones, right? So that's why stakeholder mapping and prioritization is really important. If you look at step 3, it's designing the engagement methods. Now, you have to choose methods that actually fit the stakeholder type and the risk, which could, include interviews, surveys, having focus groups, having forums, or even like supplier, sessions to Q&A and, collect metrics. The two principal points that matter over here are first, the design for accessibility. So the right voices can actually participate. And then secondly is the design for psychological safety, especially in the workforce inputs, because people usually will not raise any safety, ethics, or operational concerns if it's too risky to like speak up. Then the fourth step is execution, which is to engage and capture evidence. This is where the AA1000 becomes actually assurance friendly. So it's not just what you've heard, but you're actually showing what you've heard and how you've heard it. So you document the information whether it's like a participant profile, dates, topics, what were the key concerns without really exposing the sensitive personal data. So you essentially maintain like an audit trail. You can have like survey instruments, notes, coded themes, and so forth. So ultimately, the goal is if somebody asks you, how do you decide these priorities? You can answer with evidence and not just like, oh, I just spoke to somebody and just out of memory too as well. The fifth step is analysis. So this is where you convert inputs into different themes, risk, opportunities, and then that's how you determine your material topics. This is a transition step from conversion to governance. So for each material topic, you have to link it to metrics like which KPIs show performance and then which controls support the data quality. And this is where you take the stakeholder engagement and it becomes from like an engagement to actually operational steps. So it tells you how to measure, what to improve, and really what leadership should really focus on. The last step is basically trust building and how to respond and integrate. This is where you publish what you've heard and what are the commitments, action plans, and who are the owners, and really what is the timeline. And then basically what you do is you embed this into a management system, like maybe you have a committee oversight, definitely have KPIs, internal audit and internal controls should definitely be involved, assign data owners, and then have like an operational plan. So once you've actually done this, then you re-engage, right? Because credibility really comes from showing progress and not just collecting feedback. So in the end, with the AA1000 cycle of planning, mapping, designing, executing, analyzing, responding, and then embedding and re-engaging, you'll see you're building a differentiator and you're just not listening. You're actually documenting, deciding, and then closing the loop. So then the improvements can be measurable, repeatable, and then obviously you'll be more trustworthy. So I will hand it back to Jamie to go over some live cases of using the AA1000 stakeholder engagement standards.
Thank you, Anissa. So I'm just going to give one example here because I know we only have about 3 minutes left, so we'll just keep this as the last slide. But I just want to talk a little bit about how organizations that our firm has actually worked with decide to leverage AA1000 SES. So many energy organizations are really hoping to operationalize stakeholder engagement across their entire organization. And they're doing this to not only accelerate decarbonization, but also to ensure a really just transition. So some key opportunities that map really nicely to sort of that 6-step process that Anissa just walked us through are, one, really mapping the transition stakeholders and being really clear about your prioritization process, depending on the influence and interest matrix, and ensuring that you're, exactly like Anissa said, not only engaging sort of the loudest stakeholders, but the ones who are going to be most material to your work. The next piece is sort of around the ongoing engagement piece. So you're really right-sizing the engagement cadence across the project life cycle. So you're not only kind of going in the beginning to sort of receive approvals for your project consents and then, kind of disappearing and going quiet for the next 4 years until the next series of approvals come along. Really, you're ensuring that the entire process, you're staying visible, you have sort of a finger on the pulse in terms of everything that's going on in the community. And one way to really do this is by strengthening your governance around engagement. So you want to ensure that stakeholder engagement is really embedded across the entire organization. And one way that we've found organizations have been really successful in doing this is by actually applying leadership KPIs, much like Ahmed just had mentioned, to stakeholder engagement. And this really provides that sort of disclosure-ready evidence that you'll need when that time comes. And the outputs and results that we've seen have been stakeholder-aligned transition activities that really ensure that you receive that sort of buy-in from those critical stakeholders, as well as stakeholder engagement activities that are aligned with the AA1000 SES, which in the newest version, we'll actually have interoperability across your sort of most prudent standards and frameworks like the CSRD, GRI, and more. With that, I think we are at time, so I'll pass it back to Anissa for any sort of brief questions or comments from the group, but thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, we couldn't go to the last example, but we'll definitely send over the slides for everyone to review. So before we transition, I just want to thank you for joining the final webinar of our series. Thank you, Alok, Ahmed, and Jamie for partnering with us for an excellent session, and thank you everyone who attended. If you have any questions, feel free to email us as we are on time today, but we really thank you and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Thank you all for attending.
You.
Thank you.
Thanks.